I will call the Administration and Projects Committee meeting to order. And first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address us on any item pertaining to our purview that is not on today's agenda? Seeing no one come forward, we'll close the public comment and go to the approval of the minutes. Any comments, corrections, or a motion?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion by Arnrich, second by Metcalf. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Next item is the consent calendar. Is there anything anyone wishes to pull from the consent calendar for separate discussion? I actually had one item. Item 9. I rather like the expanded minutes. Sitting and listening to an entire meeting to try and find out what happened rather than a quick 2-minute skim of the minutes makes a whole lot of, I don't know. Maybe there are folks out there who want to listen to the entire recording to get the overview, but simple action minutes are not quite as efficient for me. I mean, if I was there, I understand, but I'm not going to listen to an hour-and-a-half meeting. So I would like to keep the expanded minutes and still post the audio.
If I could just make a comment on that one point. Instead of having to listen to the entire hour-and-a-half or 2 hour, whatever it happens to be, the feature would allow for the user to click that particular subject off the agenda and go directly to that place on the audio file where that subject matter is being discussed.
I understand, but if you have an hour-long discussion on salary and benefits, say, I still don't want to have to listen to an hour-long discussion to get the gist of what we talked about rather than just the motion. So I don't know how the rest of my committee members feel.
Well, I remember during the Watergate time, somebody said the most remarkable thing about the fact that they recorded everything in the White House, in the Oval Office, was the fact that they actually thought that somebody would take the time to listen to it all, which I kind of agreed with. I see where you're coming from, Julie, and I'm inclined to go along with it. I didn't pull this thing because I was going to see how it works, but I think at the end of the day, I'm going to go back to where you are because I want to read more about it. I'm not going to take the time to listen to the ers and ahs and do's and don'ts and all that kind of stuff. So I'd be inclined to support you, but I am willing to go ahead as a trial.
I mean, I have no problem posting the audio. I think that's great. And indexed per item, that's even better. Because if in reading a summary of the item in the expanded minutes, I still can't get it, I'd love to be able to go back and listen to what I said again because I can't always remember. But just simple action minutes, moved, seconded, passed, that doesn't get it for me. So I don't know. Newell?
I guess I misunderstood that the style of minutes we have now are limited minutes. So I assume we were keeping this. This is a very brief, high-level overview. So if we're talking about eliminating all that and just saying moved and seconded, my seat would say no. I just thought you can't do that. That's not transparent government.
Well,
and to force somebody to have to listen, I assumed what we were doing was taking our style of minutes, which are limited because there are other agencies who do much more detailed minutes. These are, they don't take word for word. They're not transcribed. So my assumption, bad on me.
Well,
I
that's
assumed,
a question then.
Yeah, I assumed we were keeping the style of minutes we had and that we'd add the audio recordings. And I think that's a wonderful example of an agency that wants to be transparent and wants to really make things accessible. So if we're not doing that, then I have an issue. So thank you for bringing it up.
Well, maybe we need to clarify what action minutes was meant to mean.
I'll step in for Randy here. Good morning, Commissioners. So at this point, one of the goals of switching to having the audio recordings available was to shorten the version of minutes that you currently get in your packets, in part because of the amount of staff time it takes for the clerks to prepare it, because they do listen to the tape several times to try to get the gist of it. So the goal was to lighten that workload a little bit by letting the minutes that they prepare for you be even more brief than they currently are, and then having the audio as a reference. It sounds like you're very happy with the current version of the minutes, and perhaps shortening them even further to just a summary of the actions in 1 or 2 lines about what was discussed is not the wish of this committee at this point in time. But the goal was in part due to the number of hours that's spent preparing the minutes in preparation for each of the committee meetings.
Well, I would just to conclude on that, I appreciate that. So from my seat, no, I don't want to change those. And I understand that, but we all have jobs. And, we're going to lighten somebody's load. Okay. That's their job description is we need to stick to what we're doing. Doing less than what we do, I think, would be of great concern from my seat. I think we do a really good job, and they are a little high-level view. They are not detailed. There are more detailed than this. They're not transcribed. And I think we are headed the right way. So adding the audio, absolutely. Julie, thanks for bringing this up.
Well, while I'm, sure interested in reducing burden on staff, that is, after all, what staff is paid to do. And this is one thing that I don't want to skimp on. What the style of minutes that we don't do is like what you'd have in land use work, where it's pretty close to verbatim. But you got to do that for legal reasons. We're not running that kind of an operation. The kind of minutes we have now are pretty high level. They're not action minutes, but they do tell the story. And I think anybody coming up and picking them up can figure out what we're doing. If they're really interested, then they go look for the tapes. And the tape should always be there. They should be there indexed, just like you're saying. So, I'm going to support Julie on this one. I don't want to support staff's recommendation. I want to go keep what we're doing, but make sure we have indexed audio. And I don't want this thing to go to consent to the board. I want the board to know what we're talking about here. Okay.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom.
So looking at the staff report on this, so what you're doing now are called summary style minutes, and you're looking at moving to action minutes. And I'm reading something else up here that I wasn't aware of, but it kind of surprised me that it says existing policy requires that once the minutes have been adopted, usually the month following a meeting, the recordings are then destroyed. I thought public agencies kept recordings for a long, long time.
We do. We keep them for 5 years.
We keep them forever, I think. Anyway, so that policy would go away. These recordings would be kept how long?
Yeah, they would be kept for 5 years. Now, the existing policy came from a discussion, it is the board's policy to destroy the tapes, and that came from a concern of there being a conflict between, and keep in mind, this is years ago, and technology has really changed since then, but there was a concern at one point that there could be a conflict between the audio tape, the actual cassette tapes that were prepared, and the written minutes. And then it might lead to some further discussion and clarification. So that's where the General Counsel at the time, Nossman, prepared this policy, and it was approved by the board, and that's been our practice. In regards to summary versus action style minutes, the way the resolution's been written, it provides the option to do either one, and it's not hard, it's not set in stone as to do just action minutes or just summary minutes, but at least gives us the option to use the type of minutes that's most appropriate for the type of meeting we're having.
Well, I guess the final comment I had is before this goes to the full commission, it might be a good idea to provide some kind of some information about how much time we're talking about. I mean, what's the person hours difference between summary style minutes and action style minutes, so we can get a sense of what's involved in it.
Yeah, I have no objection to including that information when we go to the full authority. I remain convinced that the current style of minutes, and it's clear as you read through the minutes, for instance, of today's meeting, there are some items that are simple. There was virtually no discussion or limited discussion and, so moved. But other things had a lot more detail involved, and I think being able to get the gist of the meeting, especially for our colleagues on the other committee, if they haven't had a chance to read the entire packet, or even if they have, that would help them to understand what went on in the meeting. So, without having to listen to the whole meeting. So I think that's important. So with that revision, do we have a motion?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'd make a motion on item 9 that we recommend approval of everything in that action, with the exception that the minutes remain as they are done now. But the
Okay.
retention, the new retention, the audio, the indexing, all of that is a great idea. And the addition of, just for information only, to find out what the difference is and how much staff time it takes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do you want to include the rest of the consent calendar along with that?
Yeah, and then unless there's, let's do this one and then do
Okay.
that separately.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. A motion by Arnrich, second by Metcalf, to move item 9 with the discussed amendments. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. The balance of the consent calendar, please.
So moved.
Motion by Arnrich, second by Metcalf. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Short action item on a long one.
Well, sorry about that, but I felt it was necessary to bring that one up. So on to our regular agenda items, the legislation update, and that goes to Lindsay.
Good morning again. We're going to have 2 presentations this morning. The first presentation is per a previous request of this committee. It's by Nathan Phillips with the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee to talk to you about Senate Bill 1183, which was Senator DeSaulniers. I think I originally called it a bicycle tax bill, and I have been told, please don't call it that. Call it the Bike Infrastructure Enhancement Bill. So with that, Nathan, I'll invite you up. He's going to give you a brief overview. You'll see that you have a new fact sheet in front of you. It's slightly different. The bill has been updated and changed. You're welcome to sit down as well, or stand there, whatever you're most comfortable doing. The bill has changed since the original fact sheet in your packet. So Nathan is going to speak to you a little bit about those changes, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask him any questions.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Nathan Phillips, as Lindsay mentioned, and I'm a consultant on the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee. I'm sorry, speak up a little bit. Oops. Senator DeSaulniers actually hoped to be here, but his schedule wouldn't allow, so you'll have to settle for me. And as Lindsay mentioned, this is a Bike Infrastructure Act. It still is a bike tax. We can just put that out there right now. But I think actually the Jarvis Foundation is going to remove their opposition to it, so I'll explain that a little bit going forward. So I don't know if you had a chance to read the fact sheet, but it has changed substantially. This was put, the sponsor of this is East Bay Regional Park District, and they expressed the desire to enhance the bicycle infrastructure like the Iron Horse Trail and the extensive network that they have, which is, as you may know, in need of maintenance, and the desire to build out that system as well is there. And so Senator DeSaulniers was looking for solutions to this. And as you know, with a gas tax for vehicles, there's this steady user support for road maintenance and infrastructure, but for bicycle facilities, there really isn't. So the bill started out as a point-of-sale tax on new bicycles for adults. The California Retailers Association had pretty large problems with that in terms of the administration of a point-of-sale tax. And so the senator thought about that and came to the idea of a vehicle registration surcharge. And that can be, in the bill, it's capped at $5 per vehicle. It can be in dollar increments up to $5. So it could be a $1, $2, $3, $4, $5. The critical aspect of this bill is it's a local bill. So it would have to go to local voters. And the Jarvis Foundation wants us to amend this to make it clear that it would have to be a supermajority vote, 2/3. And the senator is fine with making that amendment, so that will go forward. And so that would then fund, come back to the locality. It would be administered by the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the revenue from those funds would go expressly for maintenance and construction of bike trails, bike paths, on-street bike facilities. So it would be directed toward bicycle facilities. And I think I'll just leave it at that and answer any questions you have.
Bob?
All right, correct me. Is this a tax on bicycles?
Car registration.
So it's going to go on your car registration
Yes.
automatically? And then,
Well-
okay, I didn't understand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do I get a choice?
The voters, so this would have to be put to the voters by a local district jurisdiction.
I.e., give
city-
me an example, local jurisdiction.
City, county, or regional park district.
So if you have a bike trail in your city, that would become a local issue.
Yes.
And then what happens if that crosses into county? Brentwood has both.
Well, a county could put that as, on the ballot, or a
No.
city could do that.
What? Okay. We have both.
You'd only expand the city portion with your dollars.
Yeah. I don't think you'd have both happening simultaneously.
So what you're saying, and you left off perhaps a regional body such as a MTC or something like that that could do a 9 Bay Area county?
The senator is actually interested in exploring whether this could be extended to the level of an MPO.
Okay.
That's not currently in the bill, but we are exploring that as a possible amendment. That might be a little bit more complicated administratively, but it's something that we're exploring.
Okay. Mike?
So just exploring that a little bit further, then, if it did go to the MTC, so 9 Bay areas, counties, does that mean that you'd have to have a supermajority in all 9, of the combined counties? what you're doing?
Yeah, it would have to be a supermajority throughout the voting
But not in each county.
population.
Okay, so.
And they wouldn't be separate. In that case, it wouldn't be a separate set of votes, I think.
Okay, let me ask another question. So going back to Bob Taylor's question, look at Moraga, where I come from. We've got an East Bay Parks District trail going right through us and also through Lafayette. And then it goes out into the county areas. We've also got some local paths, which are strictly Moraga roads. And let's leave it at that. So what happens then, can this money, which is presumably the money's being returned, if it's taxed in Moraga, then the Moraga money would have to be used in Moraga?
Yes, yes.
For
it would-
Moraga uses? Could
Yes.
How are those, how are those funds going to be, the use of those funds going to be restricted? I mean,
The bill language states that it would have to be restricted for the maintenance and construction of bicycle facilities.
So Moragas could use it on the East Bay Parks Trail?
No, they'd have to use it within their own jurisdiction. So that doesn't, but that may be,
But where the East Bay Regional Park Trail goes through the city
Yes.
of Moraga, they could use it, couldn't they?
that's correct, yes, yes. So, the intent is to have it used in the locality where it is approved by the voters. Now, that certainly could benefit other users outside of the city who pass through that local jurisdiction, but if it were restricted to Moraga and that's the only place it was enacted, well, the funds would be used there. if the county or the East Bay Regional Park District were to put it to the voters and it were approved there, then obviously it would be able to be implemented throughout that jurisdiction. In either case, I think the benefits would certainly extend outside of the specific jurisdiction in which they're implemented. So, as I mentioned, people pass
Okay, so could you please explain what the senator's philosophy is on your taxing motor vehicle owners,
Yes.
which I assume includes motorcycles. You're taxing them for the benefit of bicycle facilities.
Yeah.
What's the justification?
Okay, so actually data from the Sacramento region, SACOG, shows that for every 1% reduction in car commuters, there's a 5% traffic congestion benefit. So this is a benefit for everyone. It's a benefit for bicyclists, but taking cars off the road is a benefit for the people who choose to drive. And so I think it's a benefit that's shared across communities, and it opens up and invites bicycles and active transportation really to all people. And so, it is, I think, it's a community benefit.
I suspect it's a safety benefit as well. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to Newell.
Another question is, it's just got to do with the efficiency of this tax. So if there's a tax, if there's a dollar taxed in a place like Moraga, how much of that dollar is going to come back to Moraga?
So the DMV has in place the mechanisms and procedures to enact these local vehicle surcharges. They do it for air quality programs. They do it for vehicle theft programs. They have the machinery in place, and they've been doing it for many years. In year one, there would be, some level of the revenue would have to go to the setup of the program. But every year thereafter, this is not inventing a new kind of mechanism. The mechanism's in place. So I don't think that the costs of administering the program would be significant relative to the revenue return.
Newell?
Thanks. Maybe a little bit further on that exact subject. So let's say a jurisdiction comes up, approves that, DMV collects $5. Is like our agency, we have a 1% limitation on our revenues for what we can use for expenses. I didn't see anything in the bill that limits what that is. So if DMV said it cost us 25% for every dollar we collect to administer, it sounds like they set whatever that is, and then the jurisdiction will find out. Mm-hmm. Is that true?
Yeah. Certainly the senator is not interested in, a large chunk of this, revenue being absorbed into the administration of the program.
But it's not in there. So, I mean, just to be blunt, it's not in the language. Other bills would say overhead administration shall not exceed some percentage. This doesn't have that. So that clarifies that. Mm-hmm. Secondly, because in the multi-jurisdictions, you have an East Bay Regional Park. You might have a R7A district, for example, which is another overlay district of a semi-county agency, but it's separate from the main county. So if a jurisdiction wanted to, you could have one little jurisdiction puts on the ballot, and the money kind of goes to that. But let's say we do a countywide one, then who gets the money? Because you would have East Bay Regional Parks, you'll have all the cities, you'll have special districts. Even within the town I live in, town of Danville, we found we have a recreation district that's left over for the town. It's been there for 60 years before we incorporated. Mm-hmm. They get a percentage, so do they get part of this? I don't see anything in here that says, here's the distribution of those funds.
Well, I think that the distribution of the funds would be in the local jurisdiction for which it was approved.
But let's say the county, we all of us to get together, because think about it. What I'm heading towards is, if I wish I had a handful of marbles and I'd throw them on the floor. one represents each of the towns, one represents the county, all the special districts. We all agree, let's do a countywide, because that makes sense. Otherwise, we could have
Okay.
38 elections here, and then you get DMV trying to figure out who gets what little piece based on zip codes, and then zip codes don't form lines of those agencies. So how do we do that? We have a free-for-all, or because it doesn't define that.
I think it has to operate through the governance of the jurisdiction that approved it. So if it was a county level, approval, then
Okay, so here's the problem then. So none of us would support doing a county one. None of us represent the county sitting here. We represent cities. I'm not going to support the county. They're not going to give me anything. So that means I got to go out and put on a ballot, one for the town of Danville, one for Clayton, one for that. And then East Bay Regional Park has to do that. And then we've tiered over this. So is that $5 from each agency? And then everybody that lives in the county, we all live in the county. So then I live in the city, so do you deduct those who live in the city, and we pay our $5 here, but if the county does it, they're going to collect it from all of us. So we can double and triple dip to do this.
yeah, it's certainly the case that the intention of the senator is not to create a double,
So we got to
or
fix
triple.
that.
Yeah, I think that there is a mechanism.
It could be similar to the CMA administration, similar to what we do with our countywide sales tax for streets and roads and all the other programs. And we've got special districts involved in that. And it would have to be something you'd set up in the ordinance itself that would be what is passed.
Right.
That would
I'm
have
just-
to describe it.
I'm just suggesting that there are things that could be in this to help resolve that. Otherwise, it is a free-for-all. For example, Iron Horse Trail is a big, major corridor here. It has 3 ownerships. And one person could say, well, I'm maintaining just this little narrow portion, and that's East Bay Regional Parks. And then the county says, well, I own all the land, and then all the trailheads, which are the most expensive parts, are maintained mostly by us cities. Just think about it. It sounds like a great idea. But in fact, the details of that are what are going to make it. Otherwise, you're setting a destiny of agencies to be competing against each other. And if a county gets out first, then the cities are basically out of luck. Because the ordinance seems to be you can only do one. So if the county gets it on the ballot first, and they represent all citizens, even through our own jurisdictions, if we, the city, wanted to do it and they got theirs first, I can't go back and do it. And they're collecting the money, and they'll never give it to us.
Yeah, certainly the nature of the local political process to make these decisions could, be complicated. And I think that East Bay Regional Park District, the sponsor of this, would probably benefit from discussing with you how this may be implemented in this region, in this area. And I'm sure that different localities in different regions would, have the various ways of doing this or concerns like you're expressing. In terms of
I was just going to suggest, as my long-winded point here, but also to find the details on legislation that is this open is not the legislation that I think that serves all of us well. It'd be better to have those limitations in there. Otherwise, it has the effect of being, well, it's a good idea. I'm going to say I'm for bicycle and reducing something, and I'll count it. But in fact, you can't accomplish it because the mechanism wasn't really well defined well enough to actually allow it to enact itself. If we do have some sales tax for transportation, those are really well defined. So I'm just suggesting to give some thought back to Senator Desaulnier to put some of those things in there to create a structure and create the limitations in overhead and administration that would make it something that we'd want to support. Because from my seat, I wouldn't support it because I don't want to give DMV a lot of more money. And I don't want to have to sit there. I have no authority to argue with them. They said, well, really, for this $5 fee, it's really costing us $4.25 to manage. It could be that, and you have no mechanism.
I will definitely share your concerns with the senator, and he's expressed, desire to work to make the bill as strong as it can be, and so I'm sure he'll take those points well.
Okay, thanks. I've got 2 more comments over here, but I'm going to take Randy first.
Nathan, welcome back to California, where nothing is really easy, as you can see. One of the things that I'll offer you is Martin Engelman is our Deputy Executive Director for Planning, and he administers our bike, ped, and trail program in our Safe Routes to School, where we've gone and tried to analyze and determine all the needs for Contra Costa for sidewalks and trail improvements. Now, we haven't looked at trail maintenance, but one of the things that we do is we administer the program countywide, and so you may want to take a look at when you add things in here, agencies like RTPAs, like we are, or the definition of a congestion management agency or sales tax authority, because it might help get above that individual need versus the needs of the county. And we have not a prioritized list, but we have a master plan of how we want to proceed when the dollars are available. So I'll have Martin give you a call.
Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate that.
Okay, Tom?
You know, when you do something like this, it can always go bad, but there's a lot of examples of how this is already being done. I mean, it's like the county library system, you know, except for Richmond. I think the county operates libraries everywhere in the county. And, you know, presumably every jurisdiction that has a library gets more or less fair treatment out of it. Maybe that's not the way it works. I don't know, but at some point you just gotta trust the elected officials of the jurisdiction to make sure these things get allocated fairly. And if they don't, you complain about it. But I mean, there's a lot of this kind of thing is being done already, and more or less successfully.
Tom? Mike?
Yeah, I'm sure you don't have to tell Mark Desaulnier this, but remind him. If you were to go have this thing being done at a very local level, just take Danville or Moraga or, my God, Clayton, little Clayton, 11,000 people, right? Okay, if they're to put this on the ballot, depending on which election you're in, if you did this in a special election in Moraga, it would cost you $90,000 just on election fees to put this on as a special measure. If you did it on a consolidated election, it might cost you $25,000 or $30,000.
But
Still
tax
a lot
has to go on a consolidated election.
Yeah, that would be the consolidated election. It's a lot of money. So you figure, well, what's the payback on this kind of a thing? That's an awfully long payback period if you're talking like $1. And forget the political distastefulness of this thing, because we all know how VLFs have gone in this state. I mean, we lost a governor over it. It's not a very popular notion to tax at the vehicle level. So, I'm sure Mark is aware of all this, but just remind him that this is going to be a really tough sell at the local level. And I can't imagine why you'd support it.
Okay. Any other feedback? I think it's a matter of a work in progress, and we're looking forward to working together with you because, and including the potential, with my ABAG hat on here, that it could be something that could go to the MTC type level, so that it might be something that could be administered region-wide for those regional trails as well. But certainly at least look at clarifying the countywide type of treatment and how that might be managed. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Lindsay?
Thank you, Nathan. Next up, I want to introduce Mark Watts, who is our state lobbyist out of Sacramento. In your APC packets, you had a list of state legislation. So he's going to give you a more detailed update this morning than I usually give you, and we may be talking about a few bills that the committee may want to consider supporting or watching closely in the future. Mark.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you, Lindsay, and I'm glad to be here this morning. Just a real quick overview scene setting. This week is the final week for bills to maneuver through the policy committees if they have fiscal effects. So the last 2 weeks have been really rough on a lot of folks. But nevertheless, the bills that make it through here now go to appropriations, and then we're off and running for the next House. One other comment, I'd hoped to give you a little bit more in-depth discussion about the cap and trade, evolving discussions in Sacramento. I'll just give you two quick bullet points. Earlier in the month, Senator Steinberg had proposed a substitute structure that would govern cap and trade expenditures after the next fiscal year, leaving intact basically the governor's proposal that's on the table. He would have divided the money between high-speed rail, rail and transit, and sustainable communities funding pots. We had hoped in the intervening weeks we would see language. We haven't seen it yet, and there's some very important key aspects that we want to see the details on. For example, when he says he's pushing the cap and trade decision-making locally, we want to see that language. MTC and the organizations, including yourselves, have been looking for that devolution away from the approach that the governor has taken, which is state agencies will make decisions. So that's yet to come, and I'll keep Lindsay and staff up to date as soon as that language is available. Moving on to the legislation. Since the material that was put into your packet, we've discussed with Lindsay a couple of other bills, so I'm going to highlight them pretty quickly as we go through here. We do have some specific bills for you to consider taking positions on. The first one is AB 1447, which is really a technical cleanup to the existing cap and trade. It goes into one of the categories and specifies that traffic signal synchronization is an eligible expenditure. It got a warm welcome in the committee and it passed handily. There were some folks who were concerned about that much detail, but I think the committee said, no, we want to make sure that that's specified. And we would recommend supporting that measure, considering your support.
Let's take that one first. Anybody have an objection to taking a support position of that? Okay, I see a nodding of heads of agreement, so good.
A bill that Assemblymember Frazier is carrying, AB 1724, that Lindsay and Ross have probably committed several dozens or more than that hours in the last month alone and got to sit through a committee, deals with the CMGC authority. It passed out readily out of the committee. We do have an issue on the horizon. The Assembly member staff let me know that the professional engineers are concerned. They're not sure how this affects them. They have made some pretty late and pretty radical suggestions, which were not accepted and not considered really. But I think now that the bill passed, Mr. Frazier, with our assistance, is going to have to confront this potential opposition. It relates to how much work can they squeeze out of an effort to streamline procurement. And it's unlike design build where there was, they had a real strong hook there. Here, we're just saying we're doing design bid build in a different sort of way, adding people up front so we can manage the construction contract. And so trying to squeeze more staff work out for Caltrans is wholly inappropriate. But we do recommend strongly supporting this measure. The Assembly member considers the authority as the sponsor of the bill, and we'd like to have the flag formally planted on his bill for him.
Any concerns about that? It's our bill.
I'm sorry to say, isn't that our bill?
It's our bill. It's what we're asking for,
I can't
so,
imagine we want to support it.
all right, very good.
And just a final note on that bill, it is statewide in application, so we're generating lots of support, and we had quite a good group of folks testifying in support.
I'm sure our colleagues in the other self-help counties are on board with us, too.
They are. Mr. Mansour's bill, we had recommended oppose. It dealt with a new requirement to be imposed initially on any new toll road in the state. Would have required a 2/3 vote of the people affected, defined as within 5 miles of the corridor. The bill failed miserably. In fact, he didn't take it up. So it's effectively dead for this session. I wouldn't bother taking a position at this point in time, but I just mentioned it in passing because we have it noted on your agenda. Mr. Frazier is also the author of AB 2471, and that bill deals with public contract change orders. Essentially, it says we want to tighten up the time frame that the public agency must act when they're negotiating a change order. Once you've reached an agreement within 60 days, it still says 30 on this language, but it's 60 days in the bill. And if the 60-day period is breached, then the contractor would have the right to start billing for a reasonable amount of the work that he's undertaken, not wait until the end of the formal adoption of the contract order. And we're recommending support. Am I misreading something?
Well, there's more to it than just that. So the real reason is some local agencies will hold the undisputed work hostage for payment and try to negotiate down the disputed portion, whereas we'll pay the undisputed portion of a change order, and then we'll say we're going to work out the details of the disputed area. So in the area of the sound wall change order, the estimate was $1.2 million. And so as we negotiated the true cost of that change order, it came in at 8, exactly. And so in that case, the undisputed portion we paid, and we didn't have any disputes. But if we have a dispute, let's say it went from 1.2 to 1.4, that $200,000, whatever the extra billing is, Ivan would hold that in abeyance, pay the undisputed portion. Some agencies don't do that. And then the part of it that we couldn't live with is the 30-day threshold to have a signed change order. The sound wall change order, there was no dispute. We agreed. We issued a written order to proceed. The change order was signed a couple months later. In the case of Sand Creek, undisputed, agreed, sent them in writing, proceed for the new structure. That took 4 months, and we get along great with our contractors. Imagine if we didn't, how long it would take to get a signed change order. So that was the other piece, was the time frame that we couldn't live with.
So 60 days is what's in there now. What do we have as a recommendation?
I think it's more of a focus in on the payment of the undisputed should be done, and then work diligently to get a signed change order. But those things take, it's very difficult to have a time
Right.
frame.
Exactly. I mean, those can go to litigation, so that's,
In our case, they will go to litigation because we pulled the arbitration spec out. So we implement partnering, so it's
Right.
a little bit different.
So we are,
I support it.
you support it, the 60 days.
No, but I think we support the concept. I'm not sure we can get it done in 60.
Okay,
can
so-
you get it?
We need some language.
I think what you ought to do is, and I talked to Assemblymember Frazier, but I said, we cannot, it took 4 months to get a signed change order on a complex kind of a structure, even though it's not that complex. And we were negotiating throughout on the days, the impacts to the items on the critical path. So you have to analyze all that and make sure it's a fair change order. And that takes sometimes more time than 60 days even.
Could I suggest maybe a position of support and concept, work with author, and then we'll roll up our sleeves and
On
try
the
to come up
dates.
with on the dates,
Yeah.
rather than a specific date off the top
Yes.
of our head right now?
how do we feel about that recommendation? Mike?
Yeah, first off, when I first read this thing, I said, we have to actually have legislation to tell the world that you're going to do things the proper way. I mean, I thought this was best practice to do what Randy's talking about. I'm astonished. Now I think I understand. The devils are going to be in the details here, and you might ask Mr. Frazier to have a conversation with folks down here.
Yeah.
Because I mean, these people have got as good ideas as anybody else. So, yeah, I go along with the idea of support, but within consultation with CCTA.
Okay.
Everybody okay with that? Okay? Yeah, Noel?
I agree with everything we just said, but if we went back up to Daley's bill, the AB 2250, is anybody concerned about that? I mean, I have this issue with toll lanes. The way I read this, that as the toll lane, HOV lanes get put in here in Contra Costa County on 680, the way I read this means MTC keeps the money and gets to do what they want with it, but yet it's our road as opposed to us as the local.
If I may comment on that, Bill, his intention is to empower the toll facility developer to have maximum leverage against the state and retain their revenues. So if it's a little fuzzy now, whether it could be read to be MTC because they're operating it, or whether you've implemented it and you're the responsible entity, he's going in that direction. The fight here is emanating out of Orange County, where when they were trying to decide whether to do a toll facility, hot lane, or just mixed flow instead of hot lane and mixed flow, the state weighed in at the last moment and said, oh, by the way, we want to spend some of your money from those tolls on maintaining not just the new hot lane, but the adjacent mixed flow lanes. And they eventually pulled that back, but the Secretary of Transportation has gone on record in his transportation infrastructure prioritization report and in other places saying, the state needs to have the ability to negotiate with you on a fair share of the revenues, whether they apply to the hot lane strictly or to adjacent. So Mr. Daley is moving a bill to intersect that emerging policy. So his goal is to head that off. So it may not be perfected. It is not perfected yet. So it's a leap of faith to say, yeah, let's take it on and support it now. But I think the self-help counties are mobilizing around this issue, and this could be the focal point or the spearhead, which is why we didn't recommend a position at this point in time until we really see the color of where he's going.
Okay.
But he's well intended. I've had lots of conversations about it, and he comes out of Orange County, was well aware of that emerging fight.
Okay, so we'll watch that one. All right.
The next measure on the list was AB 2574, and I'm happy to tell you I beat that bill dead, so we don't need to take a position. I think I'll suggest taking 3 up in consideration. They would be AB 2651, AB 2728, and then Senator DeSaulnier's SB 1418. They all deal with the same issue. If you recall, in the tax swap, a part of the deal was the tax swap excise increase was made larger than it otherwise would have been so that they could backfill the impact on the state highway account of moving weight fees, which amount to almost $1 billion, to support Prop 1B debt service. So if you followed that, you get an A for the morning. But the debt service on 1B is now funded by the weight fees. These proposals all say that was done during draconian budget cuts. The transportation community kicked in. Budget's doing a little bit better. We want that money back because we've run into a dry hole everywhere we've gone trying to bring more maintenance and rehabilitation money to state and local entities. So the effect of these, if they were to pass, essentially would be to restore the money to where they came from, which is basically SHOP at the state level and local road system maintenance. So you kind of need to look at all 3 of the same. I will update you that Mr. Linder's bill was blended into Mr. Perea's bill, and he's now a joint author on Mr. Perea's bill, so you've got a bit of bipartisan collaboration going on in the Assembly. The bill then passed with no votes out of the Assembly, and then Senator DeSaulnier's bill, which is very similar, passed out of the Senate Transportation Committee with no votes earlier this week. So I would just advise that I'm aware that CSAC, so if, as you think forward for your county supervisor members of your organization, CSAC has taken a position that they're going to wait and see on this because they have other general fund requests that they're going to be pursuing in the budget process, and they don't want to be in conflict. They don't oppose this, but they're not going to embrace it. League of Cities is strongly on board with the weight fee recapturing. And I guess the final comment I'll tell you is that at 9:30 this morning, there's a meeting with the Director of Finance, so I'm going to miss it, to discuss this. I expect we're going to get a big resounding, we don't like it, but I don't think that's going to stop the impetus by either the Assembly or the Senate to do something.
No. Mike?
So then what happens with this, what happens with the 1B service?
It would then switch back to general fund debt service. So, you know,
Since the
all.
general fund is doing
yeah.
better.
We're, uniquely, 1B is the only general obligation bond that I'm aware of that's ever been taken off the general fund, in essence, and supplanted, the debt service supplanted with special funds. It was sold to the voters, if I can editorialize, as a general obligation bond with debt coming out of the general fund.
Okay. And do you want to talk about 1077?
Yes. First, I'll just mention 990.
Yeah.
No need to take it up, it's dead. Just 1077 is an effort that Will Kempton is sponsoring with Senator DeSaulnier to look at a pilot program to understand the challenges and the advantages of a future potential road user charge, or VMT, vehicle miles traveled tax. Oregon and several other states are well in advance. They've had a 10-year effort to understand how that might work. They've got a volunteer program where 5,000, up to 5,000 cars, or drivers are going to participate in a net neutral test. And so what we're saying is, because the structure that underlies the gas tax is broken by virtue of a number of factors, improving levels of alternative fuel vehicles in the fleet mix, huge gains in CAFE standards nationwide. The erosion just simply due to those factors is substantial and ongoing, and looks like it's going to keep going for some time. So what is the next model for something that looks like a road user charge, and this would authorize a pilot program? The administration is looking at this. It's one of the recommendations. I'm not sure it aligns with this bill, so at some point there's going to be some hard conversations about whether this is the model, and it's a fairly broad direction to the Transportation Agency to undertake an examination through a pilot program.
Okay, Mike?
Is Senator DeSaulnier the lone voice in this, with this idea, or is he getting a lot of support?
Yes, you got quite a room full of support from the usual quarters, self-help counties, Transportation California, California Alliance for Jobs, everybody who's trying to figure out what's the next generation of appropriate taxes
Funding.
in lieu of the gas tax.
Yeah.
Is there any way we can say something a little bit more enthusiastic than just support? Because it seems to me that this is absolutely vital. I mean, the current model is not sustainable. We absolutely have to find a new model. So is there any way we can amp it up a little bit?
I guess I would add on to that and say, my only question is DMV the right agency to do the?
Two schools of thought. DMV is expert at collecting revenues inexpensively.
Understood.
So that was the thought. He has now moved the entire thing to the Transportation Agency in the latest set of amendments, and that would have
Okay.
happened after this came out.
Okay, so with that, I can feel more comfortable about it. I think, I at the CalCog meeting, and I reported on this after we came back from the CalCog meeting in March, but we had about a 4-hour session on vehicle fees. How would you do this as a vehicle miles traveled, and the different models, using experts from Washington and the senator from Oregon, who is a Republican, who is the one that got this through in Oregon. And there are some wonderful models out there to look at, and they vary significantly from each other, but they are somewhat exciting about what they offer, and at the same time allowing people to maintain privacy, which is one of the big concerns we've heard over the years. So, and some of them are only starting their pilots with vehicles that get over 45 miles per gallon, because they pay virtually nothing in gas tax because they're such high mileage vehicles, but they still have rubber on the road that creates maintenance issues. So they're only doing some of their test stuff with those vehicles, which is interesting, but there are lots of other models out there. So I'm excited about this. I think, enthusiastic support is probably a good way to go. Any objection?
And I promise I'll
We're good.
deliver it and give him a big handshake and a big hug. I understand the point, though.
Yeah, okay, very good.
You had a presentation on 1183, the bicycle tax, and I think the direction I heard is encourage the senator to work with staff here on some of the common protections we see. I mean, it doesn't require an expenditure plan, for example, so the ordinance should probably have an expenditure plan put forward, at least 5-year or some sort of 10-year CIP approach, things like that. So I think that's something we can assist him with, and I'd be glad to work with folks here as well.
That'd be great, thank you.
And in collaboration or in concert with what the county is doing, they've sent a letter of support for Mr. Canella's SB 1151, which does not show on your agenda, which deals with an emerging issue at the Board of Supervisors level with school siting and school safety. And that particular bill, SB 1151, I'll just describe it. Basically, it increases the fines for enforcement issues in school zones. What the county is suggesting is the school zone definition is too narrow, and they're recommending it should be extended from, say, 1,000 feet to 1,320, and maybe even an option for a county public works engineering study to justify the school zone length or parameter a little broader. So we haven't heard if Mr. Canella, the author, is going to accept that kind of approach yet, but that letter went out late last week to Mr. Canella. The bill did pass from Senate Trans with the enhanced penalties or fines. So it's for your consideration.
Okay. Mike?
I was wondering if you were going to talk at all about HR 29, the outsourcing.
Yeah,
And I have a bunch of questions, maybe you can address them.
I'll try.
First off, what was on these people's minds?
It's a national movement, and so you're seeing this happen in state after state after state, kind of engineered by AFSCME. They took a softball approach, but it had teeth. The softball approach is a resolution which has no effect in law. But then you look at the vote count, and when you come back with your later bills that AFSCME and others are supporting, they say, well, you voted for more transparency, that's the argument, and you voted to reduce contracting in terms of that resolution. Now we want your support for this bill. So that it was kind of a softening the beachhead, and then they'll be coming through with bills.
It's the nose under the tent, and it's telling them, hey, we're opposed to contracting out.
Right. It was interesting when this emerged, because I was a couple of days behind the 8 ball on this one. When Lindsay called and told me about the conversation you had here, I was quickly in touch, and the organization, I'll give them credit, that was the fastest and furthest moving in this was the Contract Cities Association. They had really ramped up all the different opposition elements that were put into play at that point in time. But because it's a resolution with no force in law, it goes on the resolution chapter books, and that it just sits there. But it is the nose under the tent.
Well, do you have any sense as to when is the whole camel going to move in?
I'm afraid we're going to see in possible what they call gut and amends as we get closer to when the bills get to the second house. You'll see them change horses and some stuff put in there.
In the last 24 hours before everything has to be done, we're going to have to be on alert.
Yeah, and from a transportation perspective, I'm a little apprehensive because we have in the transportation world the somewhat adequate and sufficient public-private partnership contracting authority. That expires at the end of next session. So, I now see not only will we be fighting against PEG to restore that, we'll be fighting against the full weight of all the other allied organization, AFSCME and SEIU, et cetera. So it's going to have its tentacles in a number of different areas as we move forward. But my duty is to work with contract cities, league, and county to see if we can if we identify early enough these efforts to further their goals. And so far, I haven't seen that.
Okay, well, there's a mayor's conference tonight, right? And I'm not going to be there, but are you aware of any plan, orchestrated or otherwise, to make it clear to the representatives from our representatives in Sacramento who will be there, one of whom was the sponsor of this thing? It seems to me it's time to ask them, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Well, we know why they're doing it.
We asked that at the last meeting.
Well, I mean, scream and shout and holler and make their lives really difficult because
I did, and they yelled back at me.
you need to have to change the people or change the people.
Exactly.
And if this is the kind of stuff that these guys are going to do up there, maybe it's time to get rid of them.
Just to add to that, Mike, we did have a legislative meeting last Friday, I guess it was.
Yeah.
And so we had Mark DeSaulnay, Joan Buchanan, Susan Bonilla, Hancock, Wolk, everybody there, their representatives. And one of them really defended this and said, oh, it's none of what you're saying. But it is exactly what it is. It will hurt most of us going forward. And the world that we're going to live in, it would hurt this agency because, truthfully, we are the example of public-private. We're hiring engineers, and basically they want to say, no, you can't do that. And government is going to have to continue on the model that we're at in order to be able to provide the services, high-quality services, stabilize those level of services they want to provide, and have to have that flexibility. In Danville, we do it. Essentially, all of these special agencies that we've set up are all under that organization. But follow the money.
It's unions that are paying for this.
Follow the money and the people that are elected, and those who are trying to get someplace else, by the way, are now really paying a lot of attention to that because they want to go from one spot to the other. And in order to do that, they want those resources that are easy to get. And those resources come from organized groups. I don't have anything against them. But the motivation of this, if people realize this would, if we continue on a model where we can do outside contracting to balance, it actually protects the existing jobs. I mean, for example, in our case, during the downturn in the economy, we didn't lay off one person, didn't threaten anybody. Mm-hmm. We were able to go back and rebid a lot of our contracts, took advantage of the marketplace, and preserve jobs. So the public-private partnership doesn't threaten any taking away those permanent jobs. It allows us, because our population is growing in California now at 420,000, was a 500,000. Next year it might be up there, that we're going to grow, so our services will have to expand. How do we best do that in the most cost-effective way? So this is a resounding no. We cannot do this. This is a false way of trying to say that, my iPhone, I'm going to keep the operating system forever because I want to keep that. And we're preventing progress from going forward. And people worry about jobs. In fact, it's a way to protect those permanent jobs.
I guess I'm going to ask a question to both you guys. So would our authority take a position on this? And if we did, how firm? Where are we at with this? Or am I asking a question?
It's already passed. That's the problem.
That's the problem, but but I'm still trying to say, do we still? Like you said, okay, at mayor's conference tonight, I always speak to everybody, but where are we at? Where?
Yeah, here's a suggestion I could make. I hadn't consulted with Lindsay before this, so if I'm out of bounds, she'll blow the whistle. But you could adopt a policy, kind of unformed in my head what it would look like right now, that gives us guidance to oppose. So we've got the ability when things pop up at the last minute, we don't have to wait for a schedule hearing to come back, because the nose is under the tent. The bill, that resolution did pass. has no effect, but you know they're coming. So your best position is to say, we adopt as a principle for guidance for staff and for your advocate to oppose efforts to scale back contracting out.
Comments from the director.
Randy?
Comments on that?
And we always like to have advanced ability to weigh in.
Absolutely.
That's how I see
Yeah.
it.
I think we have to do
Okay.
this. And this is not just for us here at the Transportation Authority. It actually applies to most of us locally because, at least in my city, I have a contract city engineer and a contract city attorney. And this would affect my ability to do that too. And I can't afford a full-time city engineer. There's just no way. So this would be really, really difficult for us as a small city. Mike?
Yeah, there's a, I don't know, you've probably seen it, but there was an excellent article written by Don Tatson and Steve Falk 3 weeks ago. Really, really good. It hit the nail right in the head. And you might want to take the thoughts in there, because that's really, they're talking about it from the standpoint of a city like Lafayette, but it applies to every one of us, and it applies also to special agencies as well. So if we took that kind of a position, it would be well, thank God you're doing that.
Now, let me ask staff, do you think it would be better to have just a simple policy statement, or do you think we ought to actually have something like a resolution that this is, how we feel about doing these kinds of things? What would be more effective, and could we have it on the full authority agenda? Certainly a simple policy statement is necessary, at a minimum.
Yeah, resolution outlining your displeasure, I guess, or your position on HR 29 would help staff then articulate on those upcoming bills the position and refer back to our resolution.
Yeah, and we could cite some of those impacts and be very detailed about why it is a bad idea, not just for this agency, but for all of our member agencies. Does that sound like an idea for going forward? Okay.
So just
All right.
for clarification,
Yes.
Madam Chairwoman, so you'd like to have the resolution for the full authority packet this month?
I think so, because these things are going to start coming in, and the sooner we establish a policy that you guys can operate from and be able to jump on things as the gut and amends start to happen, then we need that in place.
Okay.
Okay? All right, very good. Anything else?
One last issue to mention. There will be emerging shortly a bill by Assemblywoman Skinner that deals with an issue that arose out of the sales tax cap matter. So if you recall, the Wykowski bill last year for Alameda included authority for this county to exceed a 2% cap. And when you look at BART and your current sales tax, that's 1%. Several cities have a 0.5%, so it doesn't really come into play. There are 2 cities that have a full 1% total, puts them at the cap. The way the Wykowski bill was drafted, it would appear to prevent those 2 cities, if they elected, to move forward with another quarter or half cent, whatever they chose, because the county-wide cap was not lifted. You were just allowed to exceed it. So I believe it's El Cerrito has asked Assemblywoman Skinner to rectify that. She's going to do it, I believe, on a single city basis. To any other community, or if the authority felt like there was an obligation or some sort of reason to do something broader, we'd have to act pretty quickly and put together a fairly comprehensive approach to her, because she's doing it for her constituents and probably not interested in doing it on a broader basis. Could accommodate it if there was a strong showing of support, mayor's conference or that specific city, the affiliated legislative members need to be on board. So there is a recipe to get there, but it's a number of check boxes to get there.
Randy?
Just a point of clarification, it's actually not the 2 cities, it's the other 17 that are in trouble, because the 0.5 cent, if we passed would fill in their remaining capacity of a half cent.
Oh, yes.
I think it's Moraga's case and El Cerrito's case, the legislation AB 210 allows us to go above the cap. So that's not a problem there. It's the city of Brentwood, let's say you're at 9% and we come in and do a countywide sales tax. Now you're at 9.5% and you're capped. So that's an issue.
Yeah, so I think we probably do need to go ahead and see what we can do, because cities like Orinda are going on the ballot right away. And, I mean, it would allow us to exceed it. They would still be okay because they're under the cap. But if anybody else wants to go for more, and Orinda is talking more in future years, I mean, we've seen how theirs is laid out as a 4-step process to raise their funds in their community, and not all of it is a sales tax. Some is GO bonds and things like that, but it's still problematic. So maybe we need to encourage our representatives tonight, particularly at the mayor's conference, to start working together to make it a countywide, at least a countywide.
And I would
issue.
believe that if it were a countywide mayor's conference type approach with the affiliated delegation members signing on, she would accept that. But time is of the essence as well.
It is. So we need to talk to them tonight. Okay, very good. All right, so we're agreed. Who else is going to mayor's conference?
I'll be there.
I'll be there. Anybody else? I guess it's up to us.
May I ask?
You know, and maybe what we should do is ask staff to contact folks and tell them of this discussion and say, please, can we all get on board on this?
And then I'm going to ask,
I mean, we'll still talk to them, but I think it would be helpful to have you go ahead and approach them and say, look, can we make this a countywide effort?
Approach who?
The rest of our legislators for our county,
Okay.
not just Skinner,
Okay.
yeah.
So just so you know, the executive committee of the mayor's conference, we specifically had a meeting, and this was one of our items in there. We made it pretty clear, but it was absolutely clear that not one person in the room agreed with us on HR 20.
Are you saying that the rest of the legislators said no? That it was only Assemblymember Skinner?
No, I'm saying in HR 29.
Oh, no, that's a different issue. We're talking about local sales tax.
Yeah, right. I just want to make sure, though, that when you think about going to the mayor's conference and talking about it, we had a specific meeting with the executive committee just to talk about. That was, we talked about all these
I'm not worried
legislative-
about talking to them about HR 29 tonight. We do that through our resolution. I'm more concerned with the local sales tax and getting on board with that right away.
that'd be the supervisor.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Are you finished?
I am. Thank you.
Okay. The question I want to ask, excuse me,
Go ahead.
the chair, I didn't ask.
That's all right.
Just jumped in. Lindsay, are you going to put a summarization here for the entire board? Because we eliminated some of them you killed, some of them you resurrected, so we kind of.
Several of them are amended significantly.
Amended and.
I will do a track changes of the same document for the full board so you can see what we changed, what your position was, what we may or may not need to consider
Perfect.
anymore.
Yeah.
So you can see what I changed on it. Yeah.
Perfect.
Good, and that keeps us out of trouble as we need to stay out of trouble.
Okay. Any other questions on other legislation? I think we're good. Thank you, Mark. We
Thank-
appreciate having you here
Thank
very
you.
much.
I enjoy it. I feel like I'm taking a master's thesis sometimes on these conversations.
We appreciate it. Lindsay?
I just had one more comment because I know legislation has gone really long today. You did have one other handout in front of you, and it is a press release from the U.S. Department of Transportation. The reauthorization bill, Grow America, was released, and I had planned to give you a summary of it, and when I opened up the short analysis, it was 100 pages, and the full bill itself is 300 pages. So rather than print those out for you, I wanted to just give you kind of the high-level press release that the Department of Transportation published. I'm happy to email the links to both of those documents to the entire board. And our federal advocate is still wading his way through it to kind of come back to us with a short summary of what is really relevant to us, what we need to pay attention to, and we may actually have him come visit to talk about it. at some point in the future. But I wanted to let you know that it has been released. I'm sure you'll start to hear about it, and I'm happy to forward some more information, but I haven't had a chance to really wade through it quite yet.
So would you include those links in the full authority packet? Just the links, not the, not
I
the
can.
bill?
Yeah, I'm happy to forward what I have right now, or the actual PDFs of both documents,
Okay.
and then I can include the link maybe in my revised staff report.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All righty, on to item 16, Hercules Rail Station, amendment number 1 for us to take it over.
Yes, thank you, Madam
Move to
Chair.
accept.
Yeah, actually, what I'd like to report is this is really a placeholder. We're in negotiations with the city on their request, or impending request, I should say, to play a larger role in delivering the project. So the short answer is, or short story is, that we're not ready we haven't concluded those negotiations, so we're not ready to bring anything to the board in May. So this was just a placeholder for that. What I would like to just take a moment and kind of give you a brief update on where we are, just to make sure you think we're headed in the right direction. And if so, we'd come back in June. So just, very brief summary, where the city was a few years ago. A few years ago, the project was kind of on the verge of failure, to be quite frank. A couple of things significant happened there. First, they hired William Silva as their project manager, and with the coaxing of the authority, and particularly Chair Pierce, he developed an implementable phase plan. The second thing that happened is, once they were ready to go to construction, they asked us to take over that work. And under Ivan's guidance, we have construction underway, and things are going well. There's a few issues we need to work out. So if you haven't heard, what's happening now is William has taken a position with another company. So he's leaving the city. The city is still trying to rebuild their staffing plan. They have an interim city manager, but they haven't had an engineer for a couple of years, and they haven't been able to find one. So they've recently at council have reaffirmed their commitment to the project. But they also recognize they need to focus on other areas. And with this being a regional project, with the capabilities we have, they'd like us to take over the project, both from a delivery point of view and being their advocate for funding. So we're working through that. A lot of questions. Randy's going to help me go through some of the books of the city to make sure that their funds actually have the fund condition that they say they have. So we don't want to take on undue risks. There are some risks that I can talk more about next month. I think they're risks we can manage through. Some of them are going to be managed with dollars, so we have to find some additional dollars, and others are just persevering through the normal issues that happen with projects. So that'll come back in June if you like that direction. The other thing I'd like to report is that on Monday we did submit a Tiger grant application in our name for the project. $22 million, kind of a phased ask. $12 million to improve 8,000 feet of UP track and add a third track through that area. Benefits that project, benefits the Port of Oakland, so we have a lot of support for that. And then a second ask of $10 million that would construct the station and some of the roads going into the station. So I think with us making the request, we'll receive higher favor than what the city did last year, and they did come fairly close. So we have I won't say we have our fingers crossed, but we're optimistic that we're going to be successful on that grant. So if you have any direction or any issues with where you're headed, I'd like to get any comments. Otherwise, we'll come back in June.
I think that sounds like a good plan. We did receive really good reception, I think, in Washington. I don't think they were just giving us lip service. No. When we talked to folks, we talked to a lot of folks about this Tiger grant, and I'm glad you made it in under the wire. Thank you.
Yes.
Mike.
First off, I'm absolutely enthusiastic about this project. I think it's really great. I'm glad we're able to do it. However, let me ask the question, play devil's advocate here. Is us getting into this business, could it be construed by anyone as mission creep? Are we doing things that we are not really chartered to do? And which goes back and examine for a minute, what is our mission statement say to this? I haven't looked at it, quite a while. Is this project consistent with the mission that we have publicly announced?
Well, I think that would be part of a question for this body to answer. Certainly, as I understand it, our mission is to effectively assist in effectively implementing the projects that are in the expenditure plan. And this project has, of the funding that's committed to the project, both from Measure J and other dollars under our control, we're into this project for $25 million. So expanding our services to cities, which I think is what you're getting at, I think it's a value-added service we can provide very well. But I think in terms of a mission of protecting the taxpayers' investment in transportation, I think it's right on spot.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Very good. Thank you. And we'll hear more about this as it comes forward.
I didn't set that up instead.
Pardon?
I didn't set that question.
You did well. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the budget.
That's right. APC Chair Pierce, Randy Carlton, CFO for the authority. I'll just make a few comments while Brian is putting together the slides. Budgets, you're quite familiar with from your local jurisdictions. They're a fiscal plan of revenues and expenditures, how we're going to spend the money and where the money comes from to meet those objectives. In our budget today, we're going to hit a few of the highlights. If you're interested in more detail, we certainly have a lot of time at the end of the presentation to address any questions you have. One item that's unique in this particular budget is just bringing forward a minor reorganization in the projects department where we're realigning some functional duties and reclassifying one position. And Ross is certainly available to address those comments at the end of the discussion if you like. I think we have, about 8 slides for Brian to go through, and if at this point I'll just turn it over to him.
Thank you very much, Randy. Good morning, Chair Pierce and committee members. We're here this morning to present the proposed fiscal year 2014-15 operating and capital budget. The total expenditure plan is $277.9 million, which is an increase of $13.6 million over the adopted fiscal year 13-14 operating budget. The variation from year to year is dependent on the timing of several marquee capital projects. The next few slides will give an overview and explanation of the proposed budget. This slide represents a snapshot of the revenue and expenditure categories to be covered. Revenue sources include sales tax, federal, state, and local grants, in addition to investment income and other financing sources, the 2012 bonds. Expenditures are broken down by the authority's divisions and debt service. The authority remains to have a balanced budget, and significant changes are a reflection of the current capital project and program projections. As we increase budget projections for capital projects, the revenue projections are increased accordingly, whereas increases in program expenditures is the contribution to cities for the completion of transportation for livable communities project grants and increased payments to programs outlined in the strategic plan. This slide shows historical sales tax data in blue, with $61.5 million in 2010 and steady increases over the last several years. The original budget for fiscal year 2014 was approved at $75.4 million. Current projections show that we should see an increase of 2% over budget. We have estimated an increase of 2.5% to $78.2 million for fiscal year 2015, as recent sales tax reports illustrate continued growth in auto, retail, restaurants, and construction. As we have just reviewed the sales tax revenue projections, I thought it would be good to revisit the distributions of the annual sales tax revenue. These percentages represent the breakdown of how the funds are distributed among administrative, projects, planning, and programs divisions from the sales tax we collect. On the previous budget summary page, expenditures for program section showed an increase of $8.4 million. The funding for these programs and project grants are strictly tied to the percentages above. Also, funds collected in previous years are earmarked for these specific programs. This slide is for informational purposes to illustrate the dramatic increases of federal, state, local contributions received by the authority. However, this slide only captures revenues that flow directly through CCTA. The vast majority of the state federal grants are used on our state highway projects and are accessed directly by Caltrans. Consequently, the actual leveraging is significantly greater than the revenues we show. For revenues received by the authority, sales tax revenue has increased 27% since 2010, whereas revenue from federal, state, and local grants and contributions has increased 456%. Capital project grant revenues reflect a decrease of $18.1 million to $75 million. The RM2 funding is decreasing $20.6 million as the Caldecott is wrapping up. The increase of $9.9 million of BATA funds and the decrease of $13.6 million is attributable to the construction phases related to the East County Corridor project. Moreover, the drop in grant revenues is the timing of projects and not because we have lost any grant funding. Several other projects saw reductions or increases based on the timing of expenditures related to the project. Overall, $75 million in grant funds is a great testament to the work done by the authority to secure federal, state, and local funds for the construction of infrastructure in the county. At the authority level, for all divisions, our expenditures amount is $277.9 million, which reflects an increase of $13.6 million over the adopted 13-14 budget. The projects division expenditures has an increase of $4.6 million. The major projects are illustrated on the slide. The Caldecott Tunnel, which is coming to an end, the increase for the BART rail extension, the State Route 4 corridor, and then some of the other projects that don't really get mentioned, the major streets, traffic flow, safety, and capacity improvements. We have Kirker Pass, Geary Road, Camino Pablo pavement, Clayton Road, and Alhambra Creek. Proposed expenditures for administration, programs, and planning have increased for 14-15 by $8.8 million. The administrative salaries and benefits are $0.6 million, relatively unchanged from 13-14 budget. This represents 0.82%, which is below the 1% limitation established by Measure J. The program's expenditures increased $8.4 million, as the expenditures associated with the division are directly tied to the sales tax revenue and the timing of projects earmarked by funding from prior years' revenue. Again, some of the other projects that don't really get mentioned, I thought I would just list through a couple of projects that might be of interest. Through the TLC, Transportation for Livable Community Project grants, which is 5% of the sales tax revenue. There's going to be a contribution, but we're budgeting for these projects to move forward. Richmond Transit Village Phase 2, $2.4 million. Central Concord Pedestrian Improvements and Streetscape Project, $2 million. Bay Trail Gap Closure, $1.2 million. San Pablo Dam Pedestrian Improvements, $1.2 million. Northwest Walnut Creek Pedestrian and Bicycle Access, $1 million. $500,000 for the downtown Danville Multimodal Access Improvements. San Ramon Valley Iron Horse Trail Bicycle Pedestrian Overcrossings, $400,000. Also, some other projects listed is 1.5% from the sales tax revenue that we collect for pedestrian, bicycle, and trail facilities. Several East Bay Regional Park projects in West and Southwest County is about $1 million. Creekside Trail Gap Closure Project, $600,000. Richmond Transit Village East Side Improvements, $600,000. Martinez to Crockett segment, the San Francisco Bay Trail, is a little less than $500,000 as well. The planning expenditures increased about $300,000, with the additional work being completed on the Contra Costa or the county transportation plan and the priority development area projects. Debt service also remains relatively unchanged at $28.5 million. In conclusion, sales tax revenues continue to show growth year over year, and grant funding for projects are increasing as well. Expenditures for projects year over year are increasing as the authority is securing additional funding for larger scale projects. Staff from projects, planning, and programs divisions are present and would be happy to answer any questions. I might have to revise that as planning and programs are not here.
Yeah, Randy.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, very much. Just a word or two about process. This is, largely for informational purposes. It's put on the agenda as the first look of the budget for next year. We could certainly take action that we would then bring back to the APC in June. But that's the intent today, is really just to give you an overview of the proposed budget. We'll come back in June with any fine tuning that needs to take place, with a recommendation from staff that the APC adopt the budget. We go to the board in June with a public hearing, and at that point, that's when we will take action on the budget, which will go into effect July 1.
Questions? No.
And for whoever wants to answer, these are kind of minor, and I kind of know the answer, but I just want to make sure we're clear. Just on a couple of categories, we just had salary increase, and I think it's because we're putting more time in it. But one was on page 1726. This is just sort of the allocation of the cost of salaries and benefits for transportation funding for clean air. It was up 25%. Our overall payroll, benefits, everything's up 2.9%, but that category was up. And then also on page 1735, when you look at project management and salaries and stuff, it's up 12.73. Are we just allocating more time or more? I just want to make sure that, so it doesn't misread, because when you go to the summary on 1734, we're exactly 2.9% up on our overall salaries and benefits. So.
That's the correct observation, Commissioner Unrich, that it's really a reallocation of time towards these other programs.
Right. And then the last one, and I always, just to make sure we're not criticized for it, on our 1% cap, we assign everybody, from Randy's and everybody, we move their time into other categories. I want to make sure that really feels transparent. So it's not like we're just saying, well, we're staying under because we're calling them different. So how do we kind of keep track of that? Are we doing it by time cards, or are we at the beginning of the year, we sit down and say, okay, you're going to be working on these projects, and we allocate. I just want to make sure that somebody says we're doing it based on something that's definable.
I can address that, and maybe Brian has something to add to it. But we closely monitor our time, and we have funding sources that go beyond just Measure J, that provide for dollars towards our staffing. And we do biweekly payroll and daily time, reflect daily recording of time and how it's been spent.
Right.
So we could certainly recreate.
No,
those records.
I knew you had that. I just wanted to bring it out so that chart has some teeth to it. So it says, yeah, we back that up. So
Yeah, we started that
Thank you.
probably 10, 15 years ago, I think. We started actually recording time to make sure that we were tracking it accurately and being able to budget appropriately, because we were concerned that it was a little squishy for a while, and we had general ideas, but now we actually track it, so that's great. Mike?
Yeah, I gave Randy a heads up on this before the meeting, and what I would like to ask staff to do is to explain or talk us through some of this reorganization issues and the first off, what are you doing and why are you doing it, and the impacts on the budget. I can kind of see it, but I think if you could crystallize it, it would be helpful. And answer the question: our two major capital projects are completed. Caldecott, Highway 24, Highway 4. And yet, we see we've got an increase of about almost $3 million or almost $5 million in projects coming up. So if you can, where's that increase coming from? And is the staff reorganization consistent with that project workload as we see it coming along?
Yeah, let me just.
Pretty loaded question, but.
Yeah, thank you for the heads up. So I formulated that Ross was going to do this anyway, talk a little bit about the reorganization. But before he gets started, one of the concepts that we had when we first got here and we took a look at as we delivered those marquee projects, we said by the year 2016, about 86% of the capital dollars will have been spent. In 2012, we went out for a bond sale, and we got prepared early. We sold the bonds on Wall Street. And we didn't sell $200 million as was planned. We sold $225 million at the lowest interest rate in 20 years. And whether that's luck or that's skill, still being debated within our team here. We think it's more skill than luck. But however, we did sell that. And when we took a look at the expenditure or the strategic plan moving forward, rather than 86%, we haven't done the calculations, or at least I don't know the number. But instead of a $61 million bond sale, we have $200 million worth of capacity. So there are more projects out in the future. So what you see there is a heavily leveraged kind of a budget where we're bringing a lot of grant money from outside. And so while that may not be specifically in our mission, we go out and we have our hat in hand and we're trying to get other sources of dollars to not only build what's in our expenditure plan, but make sure that we fill in gaps and sound walls and build extra bridges when we can. And so those are some of the things that I think when we start talking about all the expenditures in 86%, that's not quite true anymore because of the recent bond sale, and we're going to go out with another bond sale here in probably early next year. And so I'm going to let Ross talk a little bit about the maneuverings of our organization to try to set us up for future, at least how we see us providing service in the future.
Yeah, I'll certainly do that, and just add a little bit to what Randy said. There's kind of $200 million. So there's the $200 million extra, or not extra, but savings in debt service that happened with the last refinance, and then over the last 3 years, the new grants are $200 million. So they're both about $200 million. So that's what's allowing us to sustain. But really, the impetus behind all this. Over the last couple of years, I've been trying to implement two different things and changes. One is the construction management, so we added a position for that a couple of years ago. And the other is to implement what I call formalized project management and more disciplined project control. And we've had some conversations here in the past. And that latter one isn't going as well as I'd like. We've tasked that with the Parsons team, and I have to take credit for where we are now. It's just not progressing as rapidly as we'd like. So I hired a small contract with a HR firm to do an assessment of some of our peer agencies and say, how do they handle those two different functions? And what she came back with was kind of flatter organization with kind of, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4 boxes, kind of 4 boxes that fulfill those functions. So when I look at what we have now, there's kind of a natural fit. We have a very highly skilled and motivated project director who can get projects ready for construction, and that's Susan, and she'll continue to play that role. Ivan is managing. Currently, I think we have 5 contracts with us, and that's not counting the contracts that we're oversighting with Caltrans, which is completing Caldecott and some of the projects out on Highway 4, even the Aux Lane. He had to work very hard to get the sound wall on that. So we have 4 contracts that we have let, and there's 7 more construction contracts that we'll let over the next 2 years. So the work is continuing, even increasing in construction. And then with the programming and project control, that's a natural fit for Hisham as well. He's a programming guru, and project control is a lot of consolidating information, comparing your actuals with progress, et cetera. So it's kind of a combination of numbers and strategy. So that, fits him real well. So there's a good alignment of these functions to get in place and a good alignment with the people that we have on board. So that's really the impetus of this, was to try to recognize and strengthen our construction function that's going to continue for a while, and put a manager in charge of this project control, because frankly I just haven't had the time to work with the Parsons folks as much as I should, and that's lagging behind, and that's something I'm not happy about, and I think Hisham will be able to make that happen.
Well, I guess one of the things that was lurking in my mind was, I think you've answered it. So what you're not doing is taking work that could be done by our engineering services group.
No.
The contract. This is really, what you're doing is you're setting up so it's the manager of those functions.
Yes.
Is what you're focusing on.
Yes.
So it's not like you can bring that in the salt and pepper organization that we have. You couldn't bring that person in from the outside and have them working as a full-time. You want to have that be a honest-to-God staff person.
Well, what this is doing is allowing us to really expand our focus without expanding our staff. So no, we're not, this is not taking away work from anybody else. We're not out marketing our services. It's if somebody wants us to come in and help, we're more than happy to do that. And when we do that, we hire engineering and construction management firms to do that. So our described it earlier, our model is a public-private model with a small staff aided by professional firms to get it done.
Okay. So projects like the Hercules job, which is not on the program right now. So is this reorganization going to put us in a better position to cope with that? Should we end up doing it?
I believe it will. And Hercules, if we take that on, that's going to be four, I can't even count, 4 construction contracts that'll be going on simultaneously. So somebody with a strong construction experience needs to manage that, and right now that doesn't exist with the city. So this, again, it's really making it a recognized, I won't say permanent, but a recognized management function within the authority. So that.
Okay. Newell?
I want to support really what Ross and Randy are saying. I think this is, it's a little visionary that we're actually having these kinds of conversations, given the revenue. We were talking about $400 million more money in capital projects. You know, what we were doing before was different. We are in that building phase. We have an opportunity with the National Transportation funding bill coming forward that we have positioned ourselves so well because we're successful, we deliver on-time, cost-effective projects, that alone will put us higher on the list to be able to compete for those funds. And I think just for this period of time to look at this is great, because who we were in the past, we were static for a very long time. And we're more aggressive, we're covering more types of transportation issues than I think we did in the past. And along the way, if the agency helps us accomplish our overall goal, and doing the Hercules project is part of our goal, it's part of a West County project that we're supposed to be there to help. And if it means adjusting, I think in the long run, it will help us compete a little bit better for these projects. And again, I'm on the public-private side with a second P. I think this is where if we step up and take a little bit better control, I think we'll be more successful. And I think we've demonstrated that. So I just really want to echo that I think we're really on the right track. And again, that's forward thinking we are what we are now, recognizing we're going to go over this peak and we're going to be a different organization. Once we get through the capital, we're going to have to make that adjustment. So I think this is all great. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness in this.
Bob?
Yeah. First of all, I definitely concur with the Danville person over there. what I really, really want to emphasize too, we've got to realize that we're working on a county-wide basis. This is all of Contra Costa County. And this, we've set kind of the credence that we're here to help all of us. More responsibility that we can take. And, Richmond had a sinkhole. I mean, it's just amazing what we might see today, we might not see in the next 180 days because things, I'd have never dreamed the Hercules project would, Hercules was kind of a little messed up there for a while. And, what we've done out there on the Highway 4. And so consequently, we need to make sure we follow through and we are on top of the game. And this organization has been game-changing the last 3 years. So you definitely have Far East County support. I'll give that to you.
I have actually a technical question, and it goes back. It's on page 17-6 of the packet where we talk about the administrative salaries and benefits and the staying under the 1% cap. We're projecting in the current budget that we are putting forward that we'll stay at 0.82 for the coming year. But I noted in item 7 on the consent calendar, and I probably should have brought it up then, but I thought it related better to this conversation. On page 7-1, number 2, under the consent calendar, it talks about the audit and where we were and all of that and looking at it, and it said that through the prior, I guess it's 9 months, we were at 0.93.
Yep.
That's fine. That's still under the 1%. The last sentence in that paragraph is what really bugs me. And that says, if, however, allocated costs exceeded 1%, the authority has sufficient unused 1% capacity from prior years to allocate against. No way, nuh-uh. So I want to know where that came from and why.
Oh, well, I wrote those words, and just for the record, we do manage our budget to 1% on an annual basis. Putting that sentence in there was the plan B. I mean, if things were to happen as such that we did exceed in an annual period the 1%, we still, for purposes of complying with our measure, it's a cumulative figure that goes back to the time of when the measure began. So compliance is the number one priority.
Does it actually say cumulative in our measure?
That's how we evaluate all of our expenditure categories, is on a cumulative basis, unless it's something that says annually, like the pass-through. The 18% is an annual 18% of that year's revenue.
Because I've always interpreted it as an annual function.
Yeah.
So
we certainly function that way.
Yeah, I mean, that just sort of got my back up a bit because I don't think that's the way we represent ourselves to the public. I think we represent it to the public as we don't go over 1% at any time, any single year. But
I would just add, it's a good point, but I think one, we ought to just make sure we review that. Consistency is one thing. We've been an agency that's been around for over 20 years. So, and historically, I don't think we've ever exceeded it. But I do get the point as we go through the transition of going from having a staff, and there could be a peak and a valley because when we do a bond sale, we could. Now, we contract out a tremendous amount of our services, which is efficient. I get it. There could be, I think what I'm hearing is there could be a point in time where that one particular year you might have to exceed because of the volume of work you're doing. But I think what we ought to be doing is making sure that in the actual language that it is absolutely consistent. Have our attorney make sure it is, and be transparent about it and say, yeah, that's it, so we can't, because it would mean that, because I haven't seen it on there. We would then track if we're under that. And then that would be an account that would be held. Otherwise, just to arbitrarily say, well, coming forward, we're going to go backwards. Then if we're going to track it, then we should account for it. Because otherwise, we have spent it on other things through allocations. So you would want to, kind of keep that unfunded. I know you're doing it now, but...
It's in our financials.
Right.
We do reserve the 1% and the 3%.
Yeah. But let's
Okay.
go through and make it a little more transparent on that. That one sentence Julie caught it's a good point, but let's bring it up a little higher level and make sure that everybody's on that page.
It just rankled a bit out of context. So, okay, thank you. Any other items on the budget? Any other questions?
I would just
concerns?
move that, as a recommendation, that I think it would be good for us to move forward with that APC does recommend moving this forward, and that we're not making any changes to this.
Okay. I have a motion.
Are we making a motion on this? I thought this was information.
Just to recommend it forward, that's all. They're going to ask us, either we do it individually again, or I didn't hear any changes. Anybody wanted to make any changes?
No, I agree. I'm not recommending any changes at all. What I would like to see is when you move this up to the authority, that you provide the authority an understanding of this reorganization, and just the way you did. And that's a very good explanation. And it's important that between you and Randy, you said some very important things there, which you wouldn't get reading the document here. And it's important to understand at a reasonably high level as to why are you doing what you're doing and how are you positioning yourself? How are we leveraged? And that's a message that just doesn't come across. It's important to make sure that it's understood, because one thing this committee's responsible for is making sure you're not empire building. I'm not suggesting you are, but we don't want anybody out there, who's writing nasty articles in the papers saying these guys are empire building. You're not. You're positioning yourself to do what we know doggone well is going to happen. So deliver that message. Thank you.
So you have a first? Mm-hmm. Then I'll be a second.
I have a motion by Arnrich, a second by Taylor. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item, correspondence and news clippings. Commissioner and staff comments. I have no comments or reports. Commissioner comments? Reports on activities, et cetera?
I could be out of line, so you guys will bring me up short if I am.
Of course.
But I would like to be on the pension reform committee that has been, but how do I get on that?
It was
No,
the
well,
executive committee.
But I still want on it. Is there something that says it has to be executive?
We made a decision that night on what you'd have to do.
Well, there was one person who wasn't on the executive committee.
Oh, you mean because we wouldn't have two county and somebody else would fill that?
See.
I thought we gave that to the authority to the chair to do that. Maybe I'm wrong.
So what you're saying is that I can't be on that?
No, you have to ask the chair, and we're not the chair of that.
Okay, well, that's what I'm
chair.
trying to, so I'm going to have to ask the chair is there anything, okay.
If
I'll ask the
that
chair.
person has if Kevin's made the appointment or not. But I thought, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought.
I don't know.
I
That's
thought
why
we
I'm
defined
asking.
it that night.
Authority, we defined it, talked about it, recognized that we would not have two county members, that we would have somebody else. The chair has to put somebody on there, and
Okay. Then I'll call the chair.
I'll back you if you want to be on there, Bob. Just got to go talk to
Okay.
him.
Any other commissioner comments or reports? All right, executive staff comments? Nothing?
Yeah, we're done.
All right. Any other business? All right. Oh,
Sure, I mentioned it at the last APC, but I'll make it very brief. Just a quick reminder, you'll be getting a save the date probably late this afternoon or tomorrow morning. We're breaking ground on the Highway 4, Highway 160 connector ramp projects, and ceremony will be Tuesday, May 20th at 9:30 a.m. So you'll all be
You're going to
receiving.
send a note out for that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
yeah, that's great. Super.
Oh, my
No.
God, don't go there.
Okay, we are adjourned to our next meeting on Thursday, June 5th at 8:30 a.m. Thank you all.